Caracas, Venezuela, September 29, 2025. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has announced he is prepared to invoke extraordinary measures to defend his country against what he calls mounting aggression from the United States. Speaking in the capital, the Venezuelan leader warned that recent US military strikes on what Washington described as Venezuelan drug-running vessels represented an external threat serious enough to trigger a constitutional state of emergency. Maduro, 62, addressed the nation during a televised appearance, framing the moment as one of historic danger for his country. He accused Washington of escalating hostilities and suggested that Venezuela's sovereignty and peace were now at stake. At the outset of his remarks, Maduro confirmed that legal consultations had already begun for a potential emergency declaration. Today, the process began to consult the constitutional decree to declare a state of emergency due to an external threat in line with the Constitution to protect our people, our peace, and our stability, he said. He emphasized that this decree would carry wide-reaching effects if Venezuela were to be attacked militarily by the United States. The Venezuelan president's comments follow weeks of tension after US forces carried out deadly strikes on vessels in the Caribbean, claiming they were linked to narcotics smuggling and had resisted interdiction efforts. Caracas condemned the strikes as violations of its territorial integrity. Maduro framed the situation as a grave challenge to national security. "We are taking steps required by our constitution," he said, underscoring that the measures were not merely rhetorical, but part of an official process that could lead to a state of exception, an extraordinary status allowing broader executive powers in case of foreign aggression. Seeking to bolster his position diplomatically, Maduro revealed that he had recently spoken with United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres. All of this was discussed with UN Secretary-General António Guterres. "I received positive feedback from our private conversation. His position is that Latin America and the Caribbean must remain a region of peace above all else," the Venezuelan leader said. Maduro went on to describe Guterres' reaction to the situation. He was surprised by the unusual and extreme escalation that for nearly 7 weeks has been announced and launched against a peaceful country, Venezuela. By invoking the UN's top diplomat, Maduro aimed to frame Venezuela's predicament not as an isolated dispute, but as a potential destabilizing factor for the entire region. His remarks suggested that Caracas is seeking international mediation, or at least recognition of what it views as an unjustified threat. In his wide-ranging statement, Maduro shifted focus to the Middle East, launching a stinging rebuke of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent speech at the United Nations General Assembly. Maduro painted a scene that, in his telling, underscored the unpopularity of the Israeli leader's message. Netanyahu spoke to an almost empty room while 10,000 people were outside the UN marching and booing, Maduro asserted. He added, "The few who stayed inside were there to boo him. That's the right word in English, to boo." Maduro's remarks come as Netanyahu has faced international criticism for military actions in Gaza and confrontations with neighboring states. For the Venezuelan leader, the Israeli premier's speech symbolized what he perceives as an aggressive and destabilizing agenda that reaches beyond the borders of the Middle East. The Venezuelan president did not mince words when characterizing Netanyahu's address. He simply laid out his war plan, a plan of extermination against Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, Iraqis, Jordanians, Iranians, and ultimately the world. A war plan against the world, Maduro declared. By framing Netanyahu's speech as a blueprint for widespread conflict, Maduro linked events in the Middle East to his broader narrative of resisting imperial aggression, a theme that has long shaped Venezuela's foreign policy stance under his leadership and that of his predecessor, Hugo Chavez. Maduro went further, drawing a historical analogy that echoed past Venezuelan rhetoric about foreign adversaries. It was as if Hitler himself had stood up to speak at the UN. The only thing missing was the moustache. All that was left was for him to say he planned to exterminate those who hadn't yet been exterminated, the Venezuelan president said. The comparison underscores the depth of Maduro's opposition to Netanyahu's policies and his attempt to cast the Israeli leader's agenda as not just militaristic, but genocidal. Such rhetoric is likely to provoke sharp reactions in Jerusalem, Washington, and other capitals. The Venezuelan government's insistence that it faces an external threat from the United States comes at a time of heightened tensions in Latin America. The region has largely sought to avoid being drawn into global conflicts, yet Caracas warns that continued US military actions in the Caribbean could drag neighbouring states into a broader confrontation. By highlighting Guterres' stance that Latin America and the Caribbean must remain a region of peace above all else, Maduro sought to portray Venezuela as committed to regional stability, positioning Washington's moves as the disruptive element. Analysts note that the Venezuelan president's appeal to the UN is part of a long-standing strategy of seeking multilateral backing to counterbalance US pressure. Whether this will yield practical support remains uncertain, given the divided opinions among UN member states about Caracas's governance and human rights record. Observers say Maduro's speech served multiple purposes. Domestically, it projected an image of strength and readiness to defend the nation at a moment of vulnerability. Internationally, it attempted to rally sympathy by portraying Venezuela as a peaceful country under threat. His use of strong language, including comparisons to Adolf Hitler, appears aimed at energizing his political base and attracting attention on the world stage. By linking his country's plight to the broader geopolitical tensions surrounding Israel and the Middle East, Maduro positioned himself as a voice of the global South opposing what he characterizes as imperial aggression. Maduro's rhetoric follows a tradition in Venezuelan politics of framing conflicts with Washington as existential struggles against imperial domination. This narrative was central to Chávez's presidency and has continued under Maduro, particularly amid economic crises and international sanctions. The decision to consult on a state of emergency reflects both a legal maneuver and a political message. While such a decree would grant the president enhanced powers, it also signals to Venezuelans that the leadership views the threat as severe. Analysts caution that invoking emergency powers can have far-reaching implications for civil liberties and governance. Washington has yet to formally respond to Maduro's latest statements, but US officials have in the past dismissed his accusations of aggression as propaganda designed to distract from Venezuela's internal crises. The Biden administration has maintained sanctions on Caracas while occasionally engaging in limited diplomatic contacts. The United Nations, meanwhile, is likely to face calls from both sides, Venezuela urging condemnation of US actions and its critics pressing the UN to censure Caracas for domestic political repression. Netanyahu's government, already facing scrutiny over its military campaigns, is unlikely to respond kindly to being compared to Hitler. However, Maduro's remarks may resonate among some countries in the global South that have criticized Israeli military policies. For Venezuela, the coming weeks could prove decisive. If the emergency decree is formalized, it could set the stage for a more confrontational stance toward Washington and potentially heighten tensions in the Caribbean. Maduro's stark warning, the decree would have wide-reaching effects if Venezuela were to be attacked militarily by the United States, captures the seriousness with which he portrays the threat. Yet whether such an attack is imminent remains a matter of debate among analysts. In tying his nation's struggle to global issues such as the war in Gaza and Netanyahu's policies, Maduro has sought to place Venezuela at the center of what he depicts as a worldwide fight against aggression. His critics, however, accuse him of using external threats as a political tool to consolidate power at home. As of now, Venezuela remains on edge, but not yet in a formal state of emergency. Maduro's message to his country and the world combined legal steps with fiery rhetoric, seeking to frame Venezuela as both victim and defender of peace. His declaration that Latin America and the Caribbean must remain a region of peace above all else stands in stark contrast to his description of Netanyahu's speech as a war plan against the world. Whether this framing will sway international opinion or further isolate Caracas remains to be seen. What is clear is that the Venezuelan president has placed his nation's dispute with Washington in a global context, portraying it as part of a larger struggle over sovereignty, peace, and the direction of international order.